I mean, with Spilo, in an interesting week, maybe not the most interesting of your career, but certainly like an interesting social situation that we also
Yes.
eventually want to talk about. It's also an interesting situation because we're past the first week of the sixth season of the Overwatch League. Some things have changed there, so there's a little bit to discuss here. And I think you're in an interesting point in your career because there's this middle point between content creation, between coaching, and then between professional coaching in a pro team, right? And
Yes.
these specific viewpoints are really interesting at this point in time, but we get to it eventually. Did you did you always want to transition to content creation, or did you try to get a coaching deal for this season, for instance?
I think it was kind of weird. It was almost backwards where I was using content initially to get to the professional levels because it was what allowed me to get the repetition and also allowed me to kind of get my name out there so that other contenders teams at that time would be able to know who I was, what I was capable of doing. But doing well with content was never something that was out of the question. In fact, my brother-in-law was always like, you should get into it more, you should get into it more. And then I guess after getting into the league and even as positive of an experience as London was, even in my first season, um, I just realized that that's just not something that I was going to be able or be interested to do long term. I'm a bit older than I think a lot of other players and coaches, even coaches are, and I think you start to realize that like, oh man, this is not going to work long term. Not with family, not with pursuing passions of my own, not with my own time management. And so it was like using the knowledge that I had gained in the pro scene, not even in Overwatch League, just getting to the point where I was good enough to be Overwatch League, and then using that to be a content creator, and kind of fills a niche that I don't think is really filled out there as a content creator anyway.
Yeah. That what is that situation like? Because I assume, and there's no regulation on coaching salaries.
Right.
I assume at a certain point you're looking at your realistic earning potential down the line. It's not realistically in a
No,
trajectory that looks good. So,
no.
like in hindsight, do you just feel like that decision was made for you, but eventually would have had to made it anyway?
I mean, this was planning on being my last season regardless. I'd even had doctor's appointments. I've been dealing with some health issues, and they're like, "This is not a good scene for you. You know, you're dealing with a lot of stress-related health issues." And it just was not like I used to talk to my wife about it, and it was like, you know, it's very, very stressful. There's a lot of hours being spent in, and it doesn't pay very much. And I'm a very passionate competitor, but there's a lot of things that you can compete at. And I think Overwatch League was the goal to kind of check it off the list to tell myself that I had been good enough. And I knew that I had been good enough. But not checking all those three of those boxes being checked was a really difficult thing. And then, like you said, having that decision being made for me with budget concerns and all that other stuff was really a blessing in disguise because the timing leading up to Overwatch 2 could not have been more perfect. And I think even just with my living situation, like how many Overwatch League teams are going to be interested in somebody that's like, yeah, I'm not moving. I'm not willing to, you know, go and live with, you know, 19-year-old guys for 7, 8 months out of the year and leave my wife behind. I did that to an extent with Uprising Academy with Boston for only 2 or 3 months. And it was misery. Like it was really, truly misery. It was not enjoyable at all. Obviously, the team results weren't the best either, so that was not exactly helping the situation. But I think people underrate just being able to kind of make control of their own life decisions, especially as you get older. And that was something that the league was not going to be able to provide. It is your identity when you are in the scene, especially right now. It is your full identity is expected for you to do nothing but and think of nothing but. And that definitely means it's something that is really not sustainable for most people. Not even to consider the finances of it, which right now it's like is the ceiling could not be lower right now.
Sure. What is your current situation like? Is there something you do full time and then you do content on the side and I think you also do coaching. Like what's
Uh-huh.
the professional situation at the moment?
Sure. So it's a jack of all trades. Sometimes I'm like, where is my niche? And I think the niche is that the fact that there isn't really a niche right now, and I just kind of do a little bit of everything. So the majority of the income that I make right now is through private coaching or stream coaching. So I do a lot of one-on-one coaching, a lot of one-on-one coaching. These are bronze players. These are top 500 contenders players. A lot of players really from all ranks, all heroes, whatever. That's been something I've been doing for a long time before I got into the league and continue to do afterwards. So that's the majority of the income from there. I do a lot of YouTube stuff as well, and that's usually using the stream content slash the analysis that I'm doing on the Twitch stream. And then even some stuff on the side, like some TikTok stuff. It's crazy the amount of views that stuff can get for reasonably low effort. But that's the majority of it is like Twitch, YouTube, and then the private and one-on-one coaching sessions. I do team coaching as well. I've worked with a lot of collegiate teams. I've worked with a handful of contenders teams. I've had a lot of contenders offers. Some of them are like shockingly high now, so I'm not sure if contenders is being reinvested in or not. But unfortunately, the thing with contenders is still not high enough to justify what would have been essentially like, okay, well, we're going to need you for 30 to 35 hours. I'm like, well, I don't have that time anymore. But that's kind of the thing is I'm doing a lot of team coaching, but individual coaching, but not actually consistently working with one team at this point in time.
Okay. So I looked at your YouTube channel, and there's an interesting trend, and it seems to imply something to me, which is mainly your esports content, the analysis of the scrim leagues, whenever you talk about the best players like Kevster versus Lip and whatnot, those actually get pretty high views, especially for a new channel, right? Like they have over 20K, many of them. And then you also have the general Overwatch stuff, and that does reasonably well, but not as well. And yet, the last couple of videos, I feel like there's a more of a weight towards like general audience stuff. So I'm thinking to myself, is this a strategic decision? Is this just like something that interests you more? Or is it a strategic decision because, there's some implications about the health of the pro scene eventually, and it's a problem building a brand towards that. Maybe you want to be the general Overwatch guy, right?
Yeah. It's tricky because I think that the way I approach content is just objectively not the best way to make money. But I think it's also something that's partly strategic in terms of I do enjoy being the guy that I've always prided myself in my ability to break down and coach professional level Overwatch. But the things that I learned from that, I feel are also very beneficial for lower ranked players. And I find a lot of success working with these lower ranked, mid ranked players and teaching things that Overwatch League teams have to consider and breaking down the basic fundamentals of the game. And so I feel that that would be beneficial. I know when I was a lower ranked player myself and an up and coming coach, there was a real dearth of content of that type. And I've always tried to kind of fill that niche where I'm like, well, I don't think there's enough good guides or good coaching content or good. I've tried to provide that, even though I know the view count's not going to match Pro Scrim League breakdown. In addition to that, I guess it kind of goes down to that niche of where I don't like differentiating the two for myself. I put out what I enjoy doing, even if it's not going to get the best views. And I think a lot of the time, one of the major criticisms for people offering feedback is, you should keep the stuff like, your stupid Orisa guides that's, just playing Orisa, like, why are you putting out Orisa guide? I'm like, well, I mean, there's people out there that are going to find that helpful. And I enjoy helping people in that respect. So, I think that's just going to be probably the general trend for my channel moving forward is people are going to subscribe for half the content or a quarter of the content, whether that's the more general stuff, whether that's the more life coaching stuff, whether it's the more professional Overwatch stuff. And my niche is just that I like all of that. And I have a hard time picking and choosing because that's part of the reason why the league was such a burnout, because it was such a one-dimensional approach, at least the way it's structured right now. And I wasn't able to, especially with my living situation and remote coaching, is not able to get that dynamics of coaching that I find I enjoy so much. And I think that YouTube reflects who I am as a person, not necessarily what's going to be monetized most efficiently.
Right. Is there a worry for you in terms of like how this esports is developing, that type of content might just at some point not be feasible at all anymore, and like you will have to make a financial decision there?
I think it's more of a worry like long term about the health of Overwatch 2 than anything else. I think it's doing fine now. But obviously there's always like in the back of my mind, nearly in my 30s of like, long term, 4 years from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now. Is the game still going to be popular? Is it still going to be able to foster not even a pro scene, but is people going to want to get coaching? That's more of a concern for me. The pro scene, yeah, I mean, making a couple $100 off of a 3 hour, 3.5 hour analysis is awesome. But I don't think I would live and die by that so much. I would like to see the Overwatch League doing well. I think it's a lot of fun to watch and it's a lot of fun to break down. And obviously, I have a lot of people in the scene that I think I would like to keep employed if possible. But I don't think that's why I guess I'm trying to dabble into a lot of different things. Is not only is it enjoyable for me, but also if Overwatch League were to die tomorrow, okay, it would hurt views a little bit, but I already have something else in the backup.
Would it? Do you think it would hurt the amount of people that would like to get coaching if
Uh,
the Overwatch League wasn't anymore?
yes, yes, but to a lesser extent. Um, there's a lot of people out there that aren't even aware of what the Overwatch League is. I mean, I think Blizzard's marketing, hit or miss marketing with Overwatch League has been well documented. So I don't have to hit that dead horse. But I think they're even just like in the TikTok community. I think that was something that I got recommended to really put time into, and it's shocking the number of like low mid console players out there that they're just in their own little bubble. They just enjoy playing the game for fun and maybe getting to a higher rank like platinum and diamond, and they're still screaming at people to join voice chat, and they wonder why people aren't picking Roadhog. So, and I think that's the kind of community that's obviously untouched by things like the Overwatch League and things like that. So yeah, of course, there would be fewer people invested and interested. Anything hurts, right? If any of these big YouTubers quit playing Overwatch, that would impact my coaching. It's just the community as a whole benefits from it's like a symbiotic relationship, but it wouldn't be a huge thing. Be more of a personal disappointment than a professional one.
I think the one thing is, yes, retaining those that are still around. If you look about the streaming landscape,
Yes.
especially those that have game focused,
Hmm.
a lot of them had roots in Overwatch, right? I'm thinking XQC. I'm thinking, Moon Moon. I'm thinking Shore Force is reasonably big.
Super, obviously.
Super, of course. I mean, there's a lot of folks out there that had their come up. Even I would even say Tim the Tatman, for instance. They had
Yep.
that in Overwatch. They could not be incentivized to stick around. What incentivizes you? Is there something nagging in the back of your mind? Just going, okay, eventually I'll have to find the jump off point?
I've thought about that. I've had a lot of people recommend me things like Valorant and CS and things like that. You should get into that. And I've tried those games. They're very, I mean, a lot of shooters have the same fundamentals in terms of how they play. I remember people still freaking out that Overwatch 2 is going to be a totally different game and just being like, no, it's going to be a little different, but it's essentially a lot of the things still are the same. But I think I'm really good at what I do in terms of understanding and coaching the game fundamentals. I've worked really hard at it, but I've developed that skill because I like the game, and I think that's something that's hard to replace. To be fair, I haven't given everything a fair shake. I wouldn't describe myself as like a big gamer growing up, or even right now. It's not necessarily, but I do. Overwatch filled a niche for me. Really liked it. I learned a lot about it because I really liked it and really applied myself to it. And so, am I a one trick pony in the gaming scene? Potentially, but I think it's more of a one trick pony that it's because I like Overwatch, right? I think it also helps that I didn't spend the game. I think a lot of these streamers spend the game playing the game a lot, maybe not managing their time as well. And I can relate to that. I have also had times where I've not managed my time coaching the game as well. And nothing will ever tell you that you hate fill in the blank so much as spending 8, 9, 10 hours at it every single day indiscriminately, not using your time efficiently. You're going to hate whatever you're doing. And I think so times when I have disliked Overwatch was because of that. But since then, I think I've done a better job of managing my time and I've been able to keep that, I guess, fire burning, for lack of a better term.
Sure. Now, you're in an interesting hybrid position where it's like you understand the team brain, the player brain in terms of I just want to win, right? Like a lot of these guys don't think about brand building. They just
Yep.
have a look at the trophy. Honestly, they most of them don't even want to really engage in interviews. If their manager makes them, maybe. And on the other side, like then you stepped outside and now you're in content creation, even though, you know, you're still engaged in helping people become better at Overwatch still. So there's still this competitive aspect. But has your perspective on competitive or the Overwatch League or, you know, the bridging the gap changed in any way?
Hmm. I think for me, it's not been as much of a challenge to the transition because I've always enjoyed like talking and working with people. So like the quote unquote building the brand was kind of more of an excitement rather than like a responsibility if I want to stay in this. Um, there's nothing like being self-employed that's equally the most encouraging and terrifying thing at the same time. So being able to be like, all right, well, what do I need to be doing better? Like, what can I um, what my content, how I'm coaching, how I'm editing, how I'm presenting myself. It's like being able to kind of bridge that gap from just straight up no life coaching Overwatch League, you know, in my boxer shorts, you know, that was pretty easy. That was very engaging, pretty fun. I think bridging it from professional to this has been a lot of the same, but the difference is that I'm able to kind of instead of having to being in that assistant coach position where there's a culture and a training set given to me, I can kind of define my own training culture and how exactly I want to do things and where I want to apply myself and trying to find the biggest return on investment. I think for a lot of players, it's like you said, it's like they want to only win the league. Everything is just winning the league. And I think the irony of that is that sometimes those players end up sabotaging that goal with their obsession with pursuit of that. In terms of, especially when you have the youth of the people that are often in the league, they don't really understand what it takes to get better and to be the best at something. And so that usually just means applying themselves indiscriminately. I remember working with so many contenders teams, hard stuck contenders teams, hard stuck contenders players that swear up and down to me, all I want to do is win. Nothing else matters. And yet they're just mediocre and they're not ever going to be anything but mediocre. And I think a lot of players fail to understand it. It's not just about building the brand afterwards and being a more accessible and dynamic person that's going to make you a better player. But I also think even if you want to make the winning the league your goal, you can't just apply yourself indiscriminately to the game and just grind all day long, and that's going to make you the better player. There's a lot of players already in the league doing that, and they're not going anywhere. A lot of it is luck. A lot of it is intensity of how you're applying yourself. And a lot of it is building skills besides just being able to grind at the game. And I think that's something that you see in a lot of the better teams, a lot of the better team cultures had a lot to do with the success of London last season. And being able to apply that myself personally and actually walk the talk, I think I'm not planning on blowing up. I'm not really blowing up, but I've been able to build a niche for myself and succeed more than I thought I would by trying to apply those principles that I coach.
Makes sense, yeah.
Kind of a broad answer, I guess, not exactly very specific, but
Do you think if players engaged more in content creation or whatever, that could give them a perspective that would even maybe be helpful overall in like potentially even improving at the game?
I think so. I think so. I worked with one of the mental performance coaches that would help out with Cloud9 back in the day through I think the business was called Fit Gamer. And Landon, good friend of mine, and he was always talking about one of the best things that he thinks players could do, especially during the off season, was coach a bronze, coach silver and gold players about the game. And he thought that being able to engage in a community like that, developing your communicational skills like that, working with people one-on-one, learning that patience, but then also just being able to explain the base fundamentals of your game. Maybe not content creation indiscriminately, but being able to have, you know, one-on-one conversations and then also being able to communicate and explain the game and teach the game. thought that it would make them better players, and I think I would agree with that. So I wouldn't say content creation broadly, but working on your communicational skills, getting outside of the house, so to maybe even if it's just philosophically, would be something that I think a lot of players would benefit from.
Sure. Now, we would have eventually had you on anyway, but
Yes.
because there was an interesting week and an interesting occurrence for you this week, I thought it was an interesting topic because it hits on a couple of points that I feel are currently not just a problem of Overwatch, even though it has been a problem of Overwatch esports for a while, but it's one of esports in general. And while we are in this esports winter, I think we're doing a lot of fat cutting and we want to figure out what is the thing that we need to change, right? Like we want to develop business models. And part of that is making the product better, right? And wanting people to be more engaged, not just become more people that stick to the product, but also have them spend more money on that stuff. And
Right.
it almost necessarily then either needs to have the product improve or it needs to take a bigger space in those people's lives, right? And the question is, how do you make them buy in? So in your situation, it was, I think, you're a very bought in person into Overwatch esport, and you saw the how post match threads, how play was talked about. You had coached some of these players. There were probably some personal emotions. Then the professional side of people just like misinterpreting what is actually happening on the server, the tone in which it was done. Now that you've had time to think about it, and you also made a video about it, like, how do you think about it now?
I mean, I think it's definitely one of the situations where, definitely some hypocrisy on my end where I'm using the Twitter subspace where there isn't a lot of nuance to kind of fire back at the injustice that I'm seeing. And honestly, it started off as like a joke, and then it probably took it too seriously. Because I think, if we're being honest about it, it's something that I think I can definitely change within my community. People that maybe watch me, I still remember hearing more people talk with a little bit more hesitancy about calling Malthul a bronze player, because I went on stream with the replay codes from scrims and showed that yes, Malthul was feeding whatever that one Coliseo, and you had like 12 deaths or something like that. It was like, hey, do you see a lot of these deaths are a little bit more nuanced than that? There's probably some team issues coming in here. And my point isn't that there aren't players in the league that are bad. There are players in the league that are bad. And there are players in the league that are good. And there are teams that have good strategies, and there are good and bad compositions. But I think you don't have to be a pro to make that assumption. I don't even think pros can always analyze it properly. But I think when there's doubt, I think it would be better of us to not assume the worst. And I think that's not just a professional Overwatch problem. I don't even think that's a professional sports problem. I think that's just a social media problem in general, is we tend to assume the worst whenever something comes out. I mean, how many times has this happened where, oh, so-and-so said something, let's rush to that case, and oh, well, there's more nuance to that. So for me, I think engaging in that in the way that I did was not good, because nobody learns a lesson from being said, hey, you're a big sack of idiots, like you guys are morons, right? Nobody learns from that, right? Nobody's gonna be like, oh, you know what, he's right, like, yeah, I'm gonna be more careful about what I say. And I think that's the main mistake I made. I don't step back with my stance on the issue, but the way I communicated was just a terrible and ironic as well, considering what I was accusing them of doing. So I think we're in a scene right now, and we were talking about this before we started recording, where it's smaller. It's smaller. Players have access to a lot more feedback that other professionals don't have, or more. I'm sure, like, it's so broad that at that point it doesn't even matter. You can access players at players. It's very easy to get some criticisms, and also I think in comparison to a lot of other professional fields, the players are a lot more young. And I'm going to say this as respectfully as I can, but they're not as socially adept. So they're not as used to dealing with criticisms, especially in the field where they probably spend a large majority of their time, which is social media, online interaction. So I think I'm not saying that it is is wrong to ever criticize or even call something stupid or bad or one of the weak points or whatever. But I think that in the community, that people that I can reach and I can set an example for, even with the people watching my stream analysis, I'm always going to try and set an example of showing that there is some nuance here. Don't know the full situation. This player is, making mistakes and is not playing well, but it's not simple that they're just the trashiest player in the history of the universe and they should deserve to be cut and they're worthless human beings and this composition is trash, right? I was honestly baffled by a couple of the choices compositionally this past weekend, but instead of trying to go, oh, this composition is trash, I have to understand that I'm not in scrims and every team's VOD reviews anymore. So I don't know the full story and there's something that I might be missing. So I'm going to go, I don't get this, guys. I don't think this is great, but maybe it's because of, fill in the blank, right? So I think that's kind of been like trying to lead by example. And I hope that if nothing else, players can see that, hey, I get it. I understand what you've been through. I've been through that. That's how I learned. And I hope that players, if the players have nothing else learned, that people aren't always as ugly as they seem online. They just don't understand the nuance as much. That's my main takeaway.
Do you think that when people post on these public forums, they always want to have fair takes? Or
No.
Okay, let me unroll this differently.
Sure.
I think in 2010, I saw a sentence on an esports forum that has stuck with me since now, and I feel like for a lot of it, it's still true. The sentence was, esports is a lie, it's all about the drama. Okay? And I feel this, not just about esports, I feel this about some sports more than others.
Yeah.
I think MMA, in terms of being all about the drama and
very
less
toxic culture.
Right?
Yeah.
Like trying to almost pretend that something's going on there and like trying to really, get the spirits flowing there.
Yeah. Yeah.
My concern is two things. The first thing is, what if we can't make this entertaining by just being, focusing too much on this, just on the sport? It's hard to understand in the first place. And the second thing is, does it always have to be fair in terms of like this pub chat? I don't know. Like if I'm with friends sitting in a pub, I'm probably going to say some stuff that I don't mean about the football game I'm watching. I'm just chatting some shit. But then now these spaces are social media where the players can receive this. So what's the answer?
Right. I mean, I don't think there is an answer. Negativity sells better. Always. It always has done so. I mean, I have this one distinct memory in my brain of many years ago and almost stopping stream coaching because I was so demotivated by the low viewers that I was getting despite putting out good content, at least I felt like at the time, and explaining things well. And I remember one time I was so tired, I asked a student, they weren't even voiced, can I just roast you? Is that fine? And that from then on, I don't know if it's correlation, causation, whatever, but my views started to go up when I started to be creative and insulting and just trashing people. And it was all in good fun, but it was very negative and, openly laughing and I would sit there with a pen and paper and try and make up new insults. And that's where, stuff started to blow up. My recent Lifeweaver video, everything right with Lifeweaver would not have gotten more than 3,000 or 4,000 views. Everything wrong with Lifeweaver did a little bit better. Now, in that video, I try to be fair as much as I can while I'm being negative, but it's just negativity does better. It's more fun. Like if I'm watching a sports team, there are more sports teams that I dislike than I like. And I would not consider myself an overly negative person, but that's just how it is. There are some people and players and teams that just rub me wrong. And so I think it's unrealistic to expect that to change whatsoever. I think the nature is that you said that pub talk is now public. And I also think to an extent that pub talk doesn't have to be as negative as it is right now. I know that in myself, that has changed a little bit. For example, sitting there with friends, family, whatever, watching a sports game. In the past, I might have been, the 13, 14-year-old trashing, like, what are they doing? What a terrible throw. What a horrible thing. Why are they calling that play? What are they doing this? What a terrible shot. And now I've gotten to the point, I don't know if it's my esports or not, if I'm just an old grumpy fogey. But whenever that starts to happen around me about people that I know that don't know what they're talking about like at all, it starts to annoy me more than anything else. So maybe it's more of a personal thing, but I guess it's like I think if nothing else, the bar with negativity is like, can we at least be like slightly show a little bit of humility before we're going to be negative. Like if you want to call someone so didn't use their ultimate the entire game, yeah, that's a mistake. That's a big problem. But I guess just being less personal about it, trashing it to the very lowest degree. I don't know. I guess it's like you said, it's nuanced. Just removing pub talk entirely is impossible. But I would like to, at least with the people that I'm talking to, at least make the pub talk a little bit more educated and maybe not quite as insulting. I think that would just be a nice thing for just human nature in general, even if it's completely unrealistic.
For sure. Have you personally, in your time in coaching, have you observed something, how that impacts player mental?
Yes, very much so. Very much so. Even back in contenders. In contenders, even more so because people tend to be like a little bit more. Anything that's written about a contenders team is like, oh, there's a match set about our game, right? I don't know if that's the case anymore, but it was back in the day, and like, a lot of players were really affected by some of the stuff. This is back in phase 2 when during NA contenders, it was Uprising Academy. Obviously, that was a disaster, and that was I think the turning point for me, because that whole situation, without going down that rabbit hole, was unbelievably nuanced. There was a lot going on behind the scenes with those players and with that organization that was basically just throwing out pitfalls for the entire team constantly. A lot of big mistakes were made that were kind of out of our hands that put us in a really bad spot. But long story short, that was the situation where even some of the not just the viewers, but casters and the larger community as a whole were very, very insulting to that team, like antagonistically so. And I think that made me very sensitive to how, because I know that before I got into team coaching, I was watching season 1 Overwatch League. I know for a fact that I probably was on some Reddit thread at some point saying something stupid about bird ring in season 1, right? Or something like that, right? So I would maybe go, man, I don't want to ever be that guy, because these players, I at some point you have to stop checking, right? And I definitely learned that, and I try to communicate that to the players that season. But that's harder to enforce, and it definitely affected the players. It not just necessarily in terms of the play, but also just how much that they enjoyed the scene, whether they wanted to continue, a lot of demotivation. And I think like that definitely affected London to an extent in season 1. There's a few players that affected it with sheer cold, which was between them. Even I guess last season with London, still something that was obviously at that point I'm not checking those threads, but I know players are checking those threads, and I know what's in those threads. And so I definitely think it is. I think you can definitely, as a viewer, go like, well, they shouldn't be checking social media. Yes, you're right. But they are. Mm-hmm. And so, do with that as you will. Do you want to be the fair guy? Say what you will. Be fair, be respectful, but say what you will. You can be as insulting as you want if you think that's accurate. But you want to be the nice guy? You got to keep that in mind. Because even with my analysis, I won't say who, but when I was doing the Scrim leak analysis of several teams, I would frequently check the viewers on my Twitch chat, because I knew those players were going to show up in my Twitch chat. Mm-hmm. And they did. I saw several of them go in. So that was a good reminder to me to, hey, don't trash these guys unfairly. Be respectful, be responsible. Because if this player was sitting right across from me, would I be saying the things that I'm saying right now? And I think that was kind of like my good benchmark, not just because I want to be the nice guy, but I know that I wouldn't say that to them if they're right here, right? So I think that was kind of a good reminder for me, even recently.
For sure. Now, I'm a little concerned that maybe it's about negotiating the tone that we want to have in these social situations. But if I look across the entire spectrum of competitive entertainment, if you want, it's very seldom just about, the competitive aspect. It's a lot of mudslinging as well, right?
Yes.
Like, for instance, the from the entertainment side, guys that have been paid big bucks, Stephen A's or like I'm struggling for American, but
Yes.
you know what I'm talking about, right? Like basically it's almost like the heel position comes from these pundits.
Yes.
And it feels like maybe that is the thing that makes the business. What if
Yes.
what if that's exactly what should be happening in order for everyone to still have jobs at the end of the day, and we're
Sure.
depriving ourselves of that experience just to protect player mental.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest argument against it more than anything else is it's like, as we said earlier, negativity sells. And I think not only does negativity sell, but ultimately what carries sports in general are storylines, right? I think people want to, even in sports that I'm not interested in, if there's a really cool storyline I want to know about, I want to read a book about it, I want to read an article about it. And usually what drives storylines are either Cinderella stories, right? Or something really negative, David and Goliath. Somebody gets a comeuppance, egotistical teams, organizations, players get their legs chopped out from under them. And I think everybody wants that sort of negativity because it adds nuance. It gives somebody for you to root against or root for. And I think that's something that you couldn't remove even if you tried. But I do think that, let's put it this way. The way I look at things may not be the best way for the business. And I have to have the humility to say that I don't know what's going to be best. So here's what I will say. I guess, if nothing else, I hope that this discourse is allowing more organizations to take mitigating factors to when they're working with the players and teams and coaches that, like, listen, whether it's social media training. I mean, I know we're talking about these orgs don't have budgets anyway, but even if it's just a coach, hey, talk with your players. Try to remind them that that's just noise. They're creating storylines, whether it's Proper's literally Jesus Christ himself, like whatever it is, just focus on your play, focus on what you need to do. This is why it's bad. This is why it's harmful. Let's build that habit. Because it is bad out there. And I think that it being bad because it's an engagement, because it's interesting, because it creates storylines is a really fair point. But I'm conflicted because I want to see it do well. But I'm also a professional that has dealt with the negativity, dealing with players that struggle with that. So it's a conflict within me. And I think that's like seeing both sides of the things, being both the spectator and having been on the court, it's tough. It's tough for sure. But I do agree. I think the whole heel storyline is, Atlanta and London last season. I mean, for crying out loud, that with the amount of relatively benign trash talk that went back and forth, relatively benign, was crazy. Like it was, back and forth, like a lot of crap going on. And so those teams definitely meant more to us. So we're not going to sit here and be like, oh, it was just all in fun. It meant more. It meant more to beat Atlanta than it did other teams. That's just how it is. Doesn't mean that they dislike the Atlanta players. No, not at all. Those guys are great. But at that time, that one victory meant more. And I think the fans felt that. The fans definitely felt that.
Right. Now, I've struggled with a certain thing. I'm sure it happens in a lot of esports. It feels like it happens more so in Overwatch than it does, for instance, in its sister league CDL. And the thing is that a public topic is discussed. I reach out to folks and they say, you know what, me commenting on this, the juice is not worth the squeeze. Like, why should I extend myself into this situation? For instance, one big thing is, and I'm not sure how you perceive the current situation, in many ways, the things they were seeing right now has resemblance to death rattles of a dying franchise league, right? You wouldn't know that from any professional talking about it in the Overwatch League right now. Everyone there's one guy that has spoken about this publicly. I struggle to name that person now because that would single them out and would make people seek that out and whatnot. And with Boston, I feel like we saw what happens when it's a team does something, a little bit out of the ordinary in terms of like the throwing scrims, then people pile on. It's really not that extraordinary if you know like how things worked in past seasons, right? Like So like putting them out there is a little reckless, even though the content is on this channel, by the way. But my primary thing is if I compare the Overwatch League and the CDL. When the CDL launched, and someone would have asked me which scene is going to develop better, I would have said the Overwatch League, because the game was more fun. Like, it seemed to resonate more. COD was maybe one of those games that was on its way out, you know. But the thing that, and it's really hard to argue that that's exclusively the thing, but it feels like what the professional players in CDL do is they speak their mind, and they speak their minds relentlessly, and they speak their mind in official channels, in Slacks, in Discord channels with the developers, with the league ops, the owners in that league speak their mind. And now, I mean, it's not great, but it's not in the situation the Overwatch League is in. So how do you get people to feel like the juice is worth the squeeze again, right?
Well, it's scary. I think there was a Reddit discussion about this not long ago, about how, like, what's with the league going on. A lot of outrage over, obviously, my big topic is the replay viewer, but there's a lot more than that. And the analogy that I tried to use was like the emperor's new clothes. There's a certain amount of prestige to the position, and that we're kind of sitting here pretending that this league isn't struggling, and that this league isn't as big as we'd like to think, and that players' salaries haven't plummeted, and that we're all professionals and we're a franchise system. But you're not pulling great viewership right now, and you have no sponsors. And so, like, I think what we have is I mean, I don't know what the profitability of the Overwatch League is right now for these organizations or for Blizzard, but it's a struggling league. Even with the viewership's looking better now, so that's good. But like, it's not monetized itself well. Obviously, COVID hit hard. You could talk back a lot about the leadership early on. The balancing of the game, especially in Overwatch 1, was atrocious. And there's a lot of things to kind of nitpick here. The communication was horrible. Lack of third-party sponsorships for a lot of lower tier 2 and so on. But the main thing is that the league tried to give itself from the beginning a certain level of prestige. We're greater than anything that you've ever seen before. We're super popular. We're super famous. We hold things to a higher, more professional standard. But it hadn't earned that. It hadn't earned that title with even the organizational leadership at the time within Blizzard and Overwatch League. It hadn't earned that, right, with the quality of production moving past season 1. It didn't earn that within the team leadership and team organization and the competitiveness of the league. I mean, for crying out loud, you have a 0-42 team or 0-40 team in Shanghai Dragons. Like that. That's not something that a franchise system should like. You can't have that happen, right? And I think as a whole, what the league has tried to do is it's tried to, instead of admit and maybe, like, I wouldn't say not literally file bankruptcy, but basically be like, all right, listen, we're not that anymore. Let's try and go back to the roots of what makes Overwatch great, what these organizations have to offer, and let's play around that. It's try to keep putting out this front when it's just not it anymore. It just isn't it anymore. And I think that's where a lot of people make fun of, whether it's the franchising system or Overwatch League, is where it's pulling garbage viewers. It just recently got to 4K after however long, the Twitch versus YouTube and all that stuff. But it didn't earn the prestige that it tried to pretend that it has. And I think that when you talk about things like, discussing juice or having open relationships with, talking openly, I guess, with between players and coaches and managers, and I mean, even if it's just things like trash talk, right? That's not professional, right? That's not professional. We don't do that here. You're going to get in trouble with the organization if you do that. But obviously, we're rather small, so we're like this very small, pretentious league that isn't very honest, and I think even the organizations as a whole, like, you have to be very careful about what you say and like how you communicate. I guess it's just like you have something that's not very big, pretending to be very big, and then as a result trying to be very, very professional and business oriented, when honestly, that might not be what's best for the league. And I think that kind of ties into what you're talking about earlier with the trash talk. Does that mean that if we trash talk more and orgs let teams trash talk more, we're more honest? Would that fix everything? No. But I do feel like that is one symptom of the disease, which is the league trying to be more pretentious than it actually is.
Can you explain what is holding back people from speaking their mind? Like, for instance, for you, like, you were, let's say, in the time you were in the league, maybe you dislike something about the game, maybe you dislike something about the competitive format, maybe you dislike something how, the product is developing, or whatever it is. What are the forces that keep you from saying that out loud?
I think it's a case by case basis will be the most specific way I can unsay it. I mean, I try to consider myself a relatively respectful guy, but for example, when have players interacting with Blizzard developers, that was pretty interesting. But I know at least on our end, you had to be very careful about how you said things because we didn't want to give a bad showing for the team in Cloud9 in terms of how we were communicating. I know in terms of like transparency with like fans and just like the community as a whole, in terms of how we were doing things and how we operated, that was something that was the organization wanted to keep more of a tight lid on as well. At least when that was offered for me at the time. And also keep in mind that I was also in an assistant coach position, so I'm not exactly dictating the flow of things. But at least in those two aspects, the organization that I worked with definitely wanted to keep things more under wraps for the most part. And I think that's probably the case for most teams. I mean, I remember even, maybe it's just like a cultural thing, because I remember even being in a contenders coach and having a heck of a time trying to find out what other coaches were doing and what other teams are doing and just building relationships with other teams. I was late to the scene, which definitely didn't help. But it was hard getting people to talk about stuff. It was getting hard to get people to open up about stuff. But at least in terms of the Overwatch League, the organization I was with, definitely a little bit more tight-lipped when it comes to communicating how we presented ourselves, stuff that we said. For the most part, that was where we fell. So I can't speak for everybody, though.
Do you think they were more scared of the backlash from the community or from what the league might say in terms of fines and whatnot?
Probably more of the latter. Yeah, probably more of the latter. I think obviously, it's more the spirit of the organization is definitely trying to hold themselves to a higher standard with how they present themselves, at least within the league. So I don't think so much community backlash as a whole, because obviously the social media manager that we had last season was rather spicy, created a lot of a lot of engagement. But at least for players and coaches, there's a lot we had to as a whole, I think the team was definitely more of a nose to the grindstone. I'm not exactly a big trash talker personally, if you did get that impression earlier. But in terms of like, I definitely would have been the guy that would have been very open, like taking questions and discussing the comps that we were playing, and like, because I just don't think it gives away that much at all. But that was probably not something that the organization or even the leadership within the team would have been as interested in. So it is what it is. But I think it's just, as a whole, the culture of Overwatch League esports, starting from the very beginning, has been much more tight-lipped. I think starting with the league.
For sure. There is one comment that is also flying around in my mind, and I wonder how applicable it is to Overwatch League. But I'm not sure if you're familiar with Jacob Wolf.
I know the name.
He's an award-winning esports journalist. He had similar Twitter moment to you. I personally thought there was something there, probably not for the reasons that were mentioned, but the basic line was, players are boring now. Right? And it makes some sense to me. Like, if I professionalize, and that's maybe... I think it's also applicable in Overwatch, because I feel like in Overwatch we need to practice more than in other esports we might. But it feels like the best player in terms of the current incentive model is wakes up at 8 o'clock, gets 15 minutes of sunlight into their eyeballs, drinks their AG1, goes to the gym, comes back, maybe a light jog, some cardio in, then does their stretches so as to not get any carpal tunnel, de-stress, maybe some meditation, then we can have a light breakfast, we go into the practice, the most boring person you can imagine in terms of like
too responsible.
Too responsible, no edges whatsoever, right? In order to be the best at their craft. So it feels like, especially in an esport where things are so rapidly changing, and I think rate of change of the game is correlated to like how much practice you need in order to maintain your level. it just feels like we're completely running into different directions. Like one is trying to keep up with the best and being the best in the world. There is a lot of incentive behind that, and there's also a lot of
Yes.
attention that you then get. But for everyone else, that becomes a problem, and nobody else goes into the other dimension of like developing a personality, especially
Yeah.
at 18.
Yes. No.
Um, so how do we unriddle this?
I think a lot of it just comes through like using the resources that you have. I mean, there was definitely some frustration. I think I don't know if I should say that. I'm gonna say it. Season one of the first season I was with London, I think there was massive opportunities to like sell the team and build the team through the use of so we had so many interviews and so much interaction planned. I even did they even had like end of season interviews scheduled with the players and thanking players or coaches or communities members. And it was there. I remember seeing the videos and they were pretty interesting. There was some really heartfelt, not just from a negative side of things, but just some really heartfelt messages that just weren't shared at all. Like the project was just postponed, 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 and it never happened. A lot of funny moment scrims. I still get likes on Twitter to this day of a moment that I shared on Twitter with Blase and scrims with Kellex. I think Blase rocket jumped to some goofy spot in Busan, and Kellex is sitting there like, Blase, no, come down. Come here, boy. And it was hilarious. Or Blase rocket, he fell off the map against Glads and scrims. All this kind of funny stuff. And it happened, and I think like even not just looking at it from a negativity standpoint, there's a lot of funny stuff that happens in scrims, and there's a lot of funny interactions, and players have interesting opinions. I mean, I think the nature of even the interviews that we conduct now are like impossible to get anything out of it unless you're specifically trying to be spicy, right? You have a couple of very nice questions, and they don't have time to go more in depth. We've got to move on to the next game. We've got to give time for the desk. So it's not even the desk's fault. It's just there's so many opportunities out there to like really talk with the player. Hey, what do you think? Like, was this team any good? Like, what do you think about next week? Or like, do you think that you guys are running the right compositions? Like, there's so many questions that you could ask that would bring out what personality that there is, and I think that's a missed opportunity from first off, the team social media team, I think is the biggest opportunity. Obviously, players are going to drag their feet. But I think also from journalists as a whole, like you said, you have such a hard time getting people to want to do this, and I think that's a hard culture to break. But I think when it is broken, it makes for fun storylines. It makes for I mean, half the reason why London had such a storyline that they did last season is because we were a little bit more yappy than some of the other teams. Hottie's willing to open his mouth, Sparker's willing to open his mouth, Backwood's willing to open his mouth, and so on. And I think that's what a lot of teams are missing. And we didn't have to pretend and play it up and try to talk trash. We just were honest. And I think our social media team did a better job than most actually showing what personalities that we already have. So I don't know if the answer is we need more journalists like yourself and more people that are more willing to kind of ask the questions that on desk they don't have time to ask. I don't know if these social media managers need to make better use of the resources. I don't know if these general managers need to allow these social media managers to actually make use of the resources so that they can sell more stuff and engage the community more. I think that's the hard part for players. I mean, even I've got all these sports books behind me. Every one I read about a coach is, we had to have a media day, but the coaches know that we're not going to be here without media day. We're not selling merch. So I think without trying to get little juice or nuggets or taking people's quotes out of context, you can have legitimate, interesting things to say, whether they're positive, negative, or just funny. And I think that's something that I think is more, maybe you can blame the league as a whole because, man, it's so easy. But I think individual teams could honestly just do a significantly better job of marketing what they already have. Gamers are kind of boring. I'm not going to lie. But there's personality there. Even just asking them questions that aren't, what did you think about that game? Who are you as a person? What kind of stuff are you enjoying doing? Like, what do you think about next week? Like, what's been the most challenging game this week? Why do you think that is? Like, who is a player that you look up to? What player do you think is underrated in the league? Like, there's so much there that I don't feel is asked, but easy to throw stones from the outside. But yeah, that's my take.